So tell me a little bit about the anatomy of emotion, what that is, and how do you feel it influenced your healing?
Well, I basically learned that emotions don't just happen. You don't just get afraid. You don't just get angry, that there's, factors and energy underneath that. And so you're basically, an emotion is a thought, and you attach an interpretation to that based on a record of your past or something you've stored in your subconscious.
Hi, I'm Glennis Woods Mullins, and I love to help women to vibe, to be more vibrant, intuitive, beautiful, and empowered in midlife. So come on, let's vibe. I find it so fascinating that we live in a world right now where there are alternatives. There are choices that you can make in terms of how you want to heal. Probably the most important thing, though, is to make up your mind that you do want to heal. I have with me today a guest. We're going to be talking about that. Her name is Jaber, and she's a self-proclaimed self-healer who took the ultimate obstacle, a cancer diagnosis, and used it to completely change her life and to thrive while navigating the ups and downs of midlife. She took a holistic path and slayed all the physical healing principles and modalities. And she took that deep dive with the understanding and healing of her emotions during her journey. There's just so many people that I have worked with and other wellness experts that I've interviewed and talked with who are now really talking about the emotions and, of course, the mind, body, spirit connection. So I'm so excited to welcome you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell us, Jane, about your journey. How did it start and what happened along the way?
Well, symptomatically, I just thought I was another, woman in her 50s, just starting my menopausal journey. My symptoms happened to be the same as what everyone was talking about, as far as, this is the menopause journey starting to happen. And I'm not a fan of a lot of Western protocol. And because I had always gotten called back for mammograms, I sort of swore those off for what I thought was a few years. And I had some kind of intuitive hit that said, you should probably get a mammogram. And it had been, I think, 8 years. And unfortunately, that's how they found 3 tumors. Fortunately, I was still in early stages. And, that I will say is a really important factor in these kind of modalities. I just wish they weren't so, the radiation piece was always bothersome to me, right? So fast forward, I decide I want to heal myself. And aside from removing the tumors and doing that sort of standard of care protocol, I just went on a journey. And one of my mentors always says, you cannot heal from the soil in which you got sick. So I knew I wanted to look at root cause issues, and I started ticking those off one by one. And one of the 10 of her root cause issues is emotions. And, it's just funny how we can sweep that aside, because that's the hard work. That's the work that really requires you to get real and to figure stuff out. So, I'm 6 years in, and in this last year is when I really took the deep dive and really started to understand what, in fact, we as humans do to ourselves unconsciously or in our subconscious, which is, depending on who you talk to, 80 to 90% of your mind is subconscious. And just what the nervous system goes through just to be human in this modern world that we don't even realize. So I took the deep dive and had some really amazing revelations and had some really amazing physical data that shifted incredibly in the first 6 months of me doing this emotional work.
Let's talk about that. I know you talk about the anatomy of emotions. What
Right.
is that, and how did that influence your condition, that
Well,
knowledge?
this was part of what I started to understand is emotions are basically energy. You can break it down that they're energy in motion, and they just don't happen. People think we just get mad, or we just get scared, or we just get whatever, but there's a whole process involved, and it's basically having a thought or an observation and then attaching that to an interpretation based on a record of your past or something that you're.
So tell me a little bit about the anatomy of emotion, what that is, and how do you feel it influenced your healing?
Well, I basically learned that emotions don't just happen. You don't just get afraid. You don't just get angry. That there's factors and energy underneath that, and so you're basically an emotion is a thought, and you attach an interpretation to that based on a record of your past or something you've stored in your subconscious. And so the journey for me was to start to realize that there is an emotional scale. The negative ones are low vibration, and the elation and bliss and joy, and those are all high vibe emotions. And I really focused on where in my past, like prior to diagnosis, where I could pinpoint that I was in some pretty low vibe emotions. And they were basically relationships in my life that ended, and they were painful. They were very painful. And I felt a lot of low vibe emotions for a very long time. Envy, jealousy, scarcity, just like, why is this happening to me? What did I do? And ultimately, when I kind of pinpointed that and then really understood it and understood that our thoughts can become things, I forgave myself. And in doing that deep work, I had happened to I go and have labs drawn twice a year just to make sure I'm on track. And I had my labs drawn in February and then started working with my mentor a month or two later. And then 6 months later, had my labs done. And in February, I was pre-diabetic. And I did all the things, my diet, I do all the things very well on the physical level. But if you look at Kelly Turner's work, she was the PhD researcher who wrote the book Radical Remission. And she was fascinated with these stories of people that she learned were sent home basically to get their affairs in order and had sudden radical recoveries and went on to live long lives. And she interviewed over 1,200 people and pinpointed 10 common factors with all these people on how they had these radical remissions. Well, there was 10 factors.
Okay, hold on. Let me just say this real quickly. I have to interrupt you. Everybody who's listening, if you're not driving, if you're sitting somewhere where you can get a pencil and a piece of paper, there are jewels getting ready to be dropped. If I had my sound effects pulled in right now, it would say boom. Okay, go ahead.
7 out of 10 of these factors are emotional.
Mm,
as easy as, believing that there is a power greater than yourself that is guiding you, that's emotional. Just understanding that the contribution that these emotions make, or the negative emotions make with regard to your health. There's the, movement and supplements and diet. Those are the only 3 physical. The other 7 are definitely the stuff you have to deep dive into. And so going back to my labs, I was 5.8, which in standard of care, your A1C, your blood sugar, that's on the window of pre-diabetic, which again, depending on who you talk to, is not really, there's no such thing. It's like being pre-pregnant, you're either diabetic or you're not. And then having all these realizations and learning all this information about emotions and how to heal them. And 6 months later, I have my labs drawn and I sit down and my naturopath says, "So what did you change?" And I said, "Well, nothing really. I started working with women and on some emotional work, and my A1C had gone down 4 points to 5.4, which was just very serendipitous that I could actually, because I am pretty data driven, and I just think it was the universe, giving me what I needed. Like, yes, you're doing the work, you're doing the right work, and here's the proof."
Well, when you get the feedback of something that you've been doing that is working, that just causes it to work even better, because now you have a belief system, you have some demonstrated results. So that makes sense. But I have to ask you, what were the 7 things that you worked on, or did you work on all 7? What were the things you worked on?
Basically, I really got my meditation practice back online. It's a non-negotiable for me. I think for everyone who is on a path to wholeness, to be able to sit and at least aspire to be the observer in your own thing is a really important thing. The other thing, one of the emotional ones, is having some type of a practice. And I've been practicing yoga on and off for 20 years. And part of that is just realizing now, like, I'm going to be 62 years old in a few months. And you just get to a point where things shift and change, and you have to adapt with it. And so I don't really care if I ever do a handstand again. A lot of my practice is very, very restorative. And that is just being able to relax and to let go and just be with what is. And those are absolute non-negotiables for me. I'm drawing a blank now that you're putting me on the spot with the other.
Well, let's see. Let's look at it this way. You mentioned that there are some key emotional factors that are involved in healing chronic illness. So what would those key factors be when it comes to your particular illness? What were the key factors you thought? I know you mentioned meditation and yoga. What were some of the other ones?
And well, another one is I have a very strong rampage practice where I have a few friends. I have 3 actually partners right now that we all know if the phone rings and they come up on caller ID, you don't answer because you are basically using their voicemail as a timer to just appreciate everything.
Oh, I love that.
And this is like coincides with this vibrational thing. It's like the more you can raise that vibe, like if you wake up in the morning and if you use the analogy of a radio and you're at 96.5 and you get those rampages out, you're up to 102.7.
What is a rampage? Give me an example. What does that mean?
Well, so what we do is we basically appreciate and look forward to things. So we're basically shooting rockets of desire out into the universe. And, if you wake up and you're maybe not feeling it, I mean, you can just appreciate that you woke up in a warm bed with a roof over your head, and that you have a toilet that flushes, and there's food in your fridge, and you can just see how it's just a practice that it really works. It really raises your vibration. And then for me, I like to shoot some possibilities out into the future, and I say what I look forward to. And it's similar to a gratitude practice.
Gratitude affirmation almost kind of.
Right. The thing I like more about appreciation is kind of goes in line with this work on emotions is, you're constantly working on the energy underneath. We have these triggers that make us react in a way that is basically rubbing on something we just haven't healed or come to grips with. So when I look forward to things, I make sure that, I'm always working on what I call the energy underneath the thing, because you can manifest and say, I want to have $1 million. But if you're triggered by constantly all day thinking you're disappointing people, that's the energy underneath. That's the stuff you have to take a look at.
Yes, I think I understand what you're saying. I was talking to a friend of mine today about, we all have triggers. And even though we have triggers, many of us may not be aware that the triggers are being triggered, so to speak, until after it happens. You think, oh yeah, maybe so. But also how to get rid of the triggers. And one of my triggers is being felt like, or allowing myself to feel based upon what someone says to me that I'm not good enough. And I had a situation on Clubhouse, which is an audio platform. And I have been moderating a room for about a year or so. And I told the head moderator that I knew I was going to be late that day. Now, I had never been late before, ever, and I told her a day ahead of time that I was going to be about 30 minutes late. And so I got there. And when I got there, normally, they just bring me onto the stage to moderate. And she didn't do that. So I sent her a note in the back office. I said, oh, yeah, I'm here. Are you going to be me up? She says, well, no, because you're so late. And I just don't want to ruin the flow of the room. It wouldn't be fair to the other moderators. And I'm thinking like, what? I told her ahead of time and she didn't mention this. And it was a trigger for me because it took me back to times like with my ballet teacher. I studied ballet really until I stopped performing at 62. But I took ballet from the time I was 4 until like about 30, all through college, grad school, after college. And then I performed until I was 62. So anyway, I'm very disciplined, very regimented. And with ballet, there are no excuses. If something is wrong or isn't right, or if you're out of line or whatever, then that's just the way it is. So when she told me, well, you were late. And so therefore, in my mind, you were late. And so therefore, you're not good enough to come up to the stage or whatever. Maybe she forgot to tell me the rule, or maybe she didn't think that much of it because it's not her trigger. Okay.
Right.
So that just really upset me for months. I ended up, deciding not to moderate in that room anymore. I didn't go on Clubhouse for a long time. When I would go on, everybody was like, where have you been? Because I have about 7,000 followers on Clubhouse. Okay. I have a lot of followers. So whenever I was gone, people would know it. And finally my friend said, Lennis, there's something there that you need to heal. And I said, I think you're right, because I still feel so hurt and emotional over something like this. And she said, well, the first thing is you need to just go ahead and forgive her. She's a human being. She probably had no idea. And I said, well, I think I have forgiven her. She said, well, then you need to forgive yourself for your reaction. You're not a bad person that you reacted that way. And so she just worked with me and peeled back the layers, because she happens to be a psychologist and also one of my closest friends. I try not to have her psychoanalyze me, but every once in a while, she's like, you need help, Lennis, So by the time she finished, I felt enough of a release to be able to talk with you about this right now. Now, I don't know if this person will listen and hear this podcast and say, oh, was that me? More than likely, if she listens, she won't even know it's her, because I think it's so out of her realm of reality, And she told me, she said, when you're comfortable, you should call and let her know how it made you feel. And more than likely, she'll be like, oh my God, I had no idea. She thought I was just leaving because my schedule was full, which it was. There was more than just that, but it just made it easier for me to leave because I was upset. But it was the trigger, that thing that's so far below. And I always used to say to my kids and to my clients, when you find yourself responding really emotionally to something that seems so small, it's not the small thing that necessarily happened, it's the accumulation of occurrences that fall within that category that cause you to react a certain way. And that's how you know, okay, woo, here's some opportunity to do some work.
Absolutely.
Right. So
Right.
that's kind of how the process you went through was looking for the opportunities to do some work.
Right. Yeah. And it's a process that I'm starting to take clients through now, and we call it the core wound map. And so we basically go through and really try and think of memories, both good and bad, because a lot of this programming happens, from birth to 7 to 10 years old. You're just taking in information and really believing it to be true. So that's where you have all of these beliefs that you basically walk through the world with. And then what we do is we set these up in such a way that you can figure out what your three big core wounds or triggers are. Mine happened to be if I made to feel guilty, and I can sort of attest to having been raised Catholic as to that core wound. And then a big one for me is disappointed. So in your situation, that would have triggered my wound of, oh God, I just disappointed somebody.
Right, exactly. I would
Yeah.
hate it when I wasn't in the right form in ballet. Also, it was painful because she would take her stick and wrap the area of the body. I mean, it was physically abusive. Back
Yeah.
then, it was like no big deal. Well, it was a big deal because after I got older, my parents said, like, you can't hit my kid anymore. This enough.
Right.
But just the look that normally would come with the wrap of the toes, that look would just be like, oh,
Yeah.
and then you would go back, and I was just a kid. I mean, I was really young when I got on toe, and I started performing when I was about 12. I joined the civic ballet,
Mhm.
and that was a big deal because I was so young, and I was really good, but I wasn't emotionally ready for what went with that. And that's why I understand some of these athletes that are high performers that are young, like the young woman who was a tennis player and she dropped out of her at the top of her career because she needed that mental health time. Or I think it's Simone Biles, I believe, who talked about her emotional trauma and some things that happened with her and taking some time out to get well. And
Mhm.
that's so important. And I really do feel the things that you're talking about are very important because we all have these traumas.
Mhm.
And even if we do recognize them, we're not sure what to do with them.
Right.
So that's why when you're talking about those core things, I know it's so important. So tell us about your program and your practice. How do you help other people with their healing?
Well, basically, it is a module format that we go through that takes you through the anatomy of emotion. It takes you through a little bit of Marshall Rosenberg's work on nonviolent communication, which is basically expressing or naming what you're feeling. And generally, when we have a feeling, it's because we have a need that's not getting met. And discovering what that need is. I need to be seen and heard. I need to be accepted. I need to feel love. I need, and then starting to figure out how we can give that to ourselves.
Yes,
Because in the end, we're the creators of our own reality.
right.
And so we dabble in that and then go through the core wound map and start to work through those emotions and figure out what our triggers are. And we kind of pinpoint two or three and then start to figure out how we can work with those to not react when they come up for us.
So as you went through your own process of identifying these, for lack of a better description, emotions or triggers, the end result was that you began to get better with your chronic illness. And what is your status today?
I am I'm healthy. I haven't had any imaging because again in the medical system until they just don't, you're good until you're not good. But there's some new technology that's more ultrasound based that is doing scans for people that I'm considering. Maybe at the 10-year mark I might take a little look and see and make sure, because generally in my age range, if you get through that 10-year mark,
You're okay.
you're pretty good.
Yeah.
So yeah, just monitoring my labs, monitoring inflammatory markers, because that's generally, the smoke that knows there might be a fire wanting to brew. If you can see that you've got a lot of inflammation, and mine is so low. And I also, appreciate my good fortune and my good health, and how much I've healed, and how important I place this work for myself.
Yes. It is, and important for others too. And, of course, my following are mostly women between the ages of 45 and 55. And that's right there in that realm where women, I know, begin to think about doing the work, whatever that means for them. And I understand you have a virtual practice as well. So we've got your links down on the show page. And ladies, for those of you who have tried maybe some traditional ways and it's still not working, I definitely am a proponent of the mind, body, spirit connection and living holistically and seeing what we can do before we take pharmaceuticals or, God forbid, get on the surgery table or cut off an arm, leg, or whatever. There's this other side of stuff that we can do before we go all the way over to that side. And Jan, that's what you basically did. You turned things around. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It's been wonderful having you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a delight.
You're quite welcome. And thank you to all of you who are listening. I love bringing topics like this. And I'm sorry if I get excited about things like this, but whenever I get a chance to meet someone really wonderful like Jane that's putting this kind of information out in the world, I get excited about it. And I'll let you know when I get excited. This is something that if you didn't get all of it, go back and read it again. Go to her site. Take a look at what she's talking about, because we all have some healing to do. I don't care whether you've had a chronic illness or not. We all have healing to do. And if you've never tried a look at healing holistically, you probably aren't totally healed, because we have a tendency to have a system that works on symptoms and not causation. And putting Band-Aids on things, you know what I say about those Band-Aids? Eventually underneath is infected and pussy and all this other gunk. You pull it off and you're like, oh my God, what does that smell? That's you, because you never got it healed. So please give some serious consideration and taking a look at some of these holistic modalities like what Jane is talking about, and begin to start doing your healing process. Thanks so much for listening. And if you like what we have to say, please, like it, comment, share, let other people know, and subscribe so you will not miss one single episode of the V.I.B.E Living Podcast. It's been wonderful having you. And please don't forget to vibe. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to the V.I.B.E Living Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment, and share this podcast. Have a fantastic day, and don't forget to vibe. Bye-bye, everybody.